At first there was nothing, just darkness, until the goddess Atabeira willed herself into existence through her own godly powers. At one time, she decided to fill this void of nothingness with something. So, she created the earth and all the land we now live upon. In the larger scale of human migration in the Caribbean, the islands of the Bahamas were one of the last islands to be settled by humans. This is because the Caribbean peoples mostly relied on stone tools to be able to form the civilizations that were common for the area and time. And the Bahamian island chain is mostly made up of limestone, which is a horrible material for tools. The native people of Florida most likely saw the ocean as a barrier to their expansion, and the currents of the eastern Floridian coast made the prospect of a southward expansion nearly impossible. The first humans to settle the Bahamas present a great historical debate as to their origins, whether these people originated from Hispaniola or Cuba. But it is generally understood that these people, called the Lucayans, migrated to the Bahamas due to push-pull factors. These factors are debated as well, with some saying the pull of new resources and the push of overcrowding on the islands of origin were the incentive, while others say the push of an economic crisis and the pull to escape it are the motivators for their settlement of the Bahamas. But either way, these people spread throughout the Bahamas rapidly, and within a few generations of their earliest settlement, the Lucayan people had spread to most of the main islands. However, some more northern islands proved to be very difficult to farm due to colder temperatures. So, although there were a few attempts at settlement, the ventures were mostly abandoned. For the Lucayans, these northern islands became mostly sites for hunting and fishing. Unlike most migrations, the Lucayans arrived with agricultural practices, with which they grew local root vegetables like the sweet potato and fruits. These Lucayan peoples had a distinctive style in their pottery called Malak, but after a time, because the people of the south had easier access to trade with other Caribbean peoples, a second style began to arise, called carrier. This split the Bahamas into 3 separate areas, according to ceramics: the Malak, carrier, and transition islands between the 2 styles. And due to the environment and available resources of the Bahamas, trade was immensely important to the Lucayan people, not only outside of the Bahamas, but inter-island trade within the Bahamas too. Despite the proximity of Florida to the Bahamas, it is very unlikely that a sustained trade route was capable, simply due to the current, which made a return voyage to the Bahamas nearly impossible with the available technology, even at the current's lowest annual strength. This means that most, if not all, trade of the Lucayans was directed southwards. During all of this, the Lucayans lived in a chiefdom system that was matrilineal. Eventually, these people's norms would shatter as the explorer Christopher Columbus landed on a Bahamian island. This was the first island that Columbus and his crew would land on in the New World. Columbus called this island San Salvador, and once a party landed ashore, there was a peaceful meeting with the Lucayan people. According to Columbus's journal, when the party landed, they were met by the Lucayan people, who were entirely peaceful, and some minor trading occurred. As Columbus's journal states, even after the landing party returned to their boats, the Lucayan people followed. The Lucayans afterwards came to the ship's boats where we were, swimming and bringing us parrots, cotton threads and skeins, darts, and many other things, and we exchanged them for other things that we gave them, such as glass beads and small bells. In fine, they took all and gave what they had with goodwill. As these were the first people that Columbus encountered, he kidnapped a few to be able to take back to Spain to show the Spanish royalty what he had found. But soon after this encounter, the explorers were gone, searching for a land much more wealthy in terms of European standards. Although the lands were now claimed by the Spanish crown, the Bahamas held little value in the eyes of the Spanish, who called the Bahamas Islas Inútiles, meaning useless islands. The lands were able to escape direct colonization for a time, while the Spanish were busy colonizing other Caribbean lands. The Lucayan people were now visited by Amerigo Vespucci, another explorer, who came ashore and took around 200 Lucayan people aboard his ship. This is one of the few interactions with the Lucayan people that's documented, but it's undoubted that these native people were contacted much more than we know, through trade, shipwrecks, and abductions. European ships were a common sighting for the Lucayan people, since there was considerable traffic through the islands, as the Europeans made their way to and from Europe. This fact can also be seen, as in Spanish maps at the time, the islands were quite thoroughly mapped. The fact that the Spanish didn't colonize the Bahamas doesn't mean that the Lucayans were entirely off the hook though, as when native populations depleted on the islands that Spain directly colonized from slavery and disease, the governor of Hispaniola, Ferdinand II of Aragon, said that native people from neighboring islands would be taken as a new source of labor. From this point onwards, Spanish raiders would frequently come ashore to kidnap native people and bring them to Hispaniola and other Spanish colonies. These kidnappings would occur so often that within a few years, tens of thousands of Lucayans were taken as slave labor to other lands. All the while, European disease ravaged the native people, depleting their population even further. The final raid upon the Bahamas was only able to find about a dozen Lucayans. The Spanish had entirely wiped out the native population off the islands. For the next almost 150 years, the Bahamas would be entirely unpopulated by humans. Until civil and religious strife in English Bermuda led to a group of Puritans fleeing the colony to establish a new settlement, free from English persecution. These settlers, under the leadership of William Sale, had plans to establish a plantation colony, but immediately, these people found trouble, as after they began a small colony, one man, called Captain Butler, created division, to the point that Sale took some colonists to form a new colony elsewhere. But as William Sale searched for a new place to found their colony, the ship ran aground, and the people lost all of their provisions. The Puritans called the island that they were now forced to inhabit Eleuthera, meaning freedom in Greek. Help was able to be found in the colony of Virginia, which allowed the people to survive for a little bit longer. But as a second wave of colonists came to Eleuthera, the colony was once again strained for supplies. Soon, Puritans from Boston collected some funds to send to the people of the Puritan colony. Eleuthera was struggling for many reasons. For example, poor soil made farming very difficult, let alone trying to establish several plantations like the colonists planned. For a time, the colonists were able to make some profits from the valuable Braziletto wood and other natural resources on the island. This difficult survival lifestyle was found to be too much for William Sale, but he didn't want to abandon his creation. So, he received funding from the English crown to promote trading with the colony. On one of his trading voyages, Sale encountered a vicious storm. But, miraculously, his ship didn't crash, and found safety in an island harbor. Sale called this island Providence out of thanks, and it was later renamed New Providence. And this island soon after became a new center for colonization of the Bahamas, as some whalers decided to begin a small settlement there. A new wave of colonization was prompted by the overpopulation of Bermuda. With Bermudans becoming consistently more poor due to lack of land availability, the colonies in the Bahamas didn't seem so bad. The colony on New Providence did much better than that of Eleuthera, partly due to better soil quality, and partly because many of the colonists who came were too poor to afford a return voyage home. One major way that people in New Providence made their livelihood was wrecking, which is scavenging shipwrecks. Wrecking was so profitable here because the Bahamas were very close to the ship routes between the Caribbean and Europe, and waters in the region were very difficult to navigate. Smaller colonies also started to spring up all across the Bahamian island chain. Soon enough, to try and gain a tighter control on the Bahamas, which were fairly ungoverned, King Charles II gave the proprietors of Carolina the right to rule over the Bahamas. The proprietors really didn't do much for the colony, as the people were quite unwelcoming to any foreign restrictions on their freedom. Very often, the governors appointed by the proprietors were driven from their posts because their methods of rule were much too restrictive, or they were unfit for the job. Now, these islands technically still belonged to the Spanish, as they never really relinquished their claims to the Bahamas. And now, as the colonies in the Bahamas grew, and the geographic importance of the islands was understood, the Spanish began harassing the colonists of the land. It didn't help that New Providence, with its lax laws and political distance from the throne, harbored many privateers, who would frequently raid and attack foreign ships. Bahamians would be under constant harassment by the French, pirates, and primarily the Spanish, who fought for the land's strategic value. Despite the fact that foreign powers increasingly posed a threat upon the colony, the proprietors of Carolina did little to fortify the colony, which allowed for the Spanish on 2 occasions to raid New Providence. The latter attack entirely burnt down several colonies in the Bahamas, and anyone from New Providence who survived fled to Jamaica, while those from Eleuthera fled to Maine. But this did little to kill the perseverance of the Bahamians, as a few years later, the colony started anew, with settlers from Jamaica. But these people would also be run off by the Spanish. Soon, though, a new colonization attempt was made, from people who fled during the Glorious Revolution in England. Once the Bahamas were sufficiently recolonized, the proprietors sent a new governor, Cadwallader Jones, to the islands. Jones was a horrid governor, who worked very much in self-interest, and he became very close with pirates, who on several occasions broke him out of prison when the people of New Providence became fed up with his antics. Eventually, Jones would be removed from the island, but his relationship with pirates cemented the main town of Nassau as a safe haven for the ruffians. The next governor, Nicholas Trott, set to work fortifying the town, since, during his time in power, England was at war with France and Spain, but the Bahamas suffered from a lack of manpower to properly defend itself. So, Trott ended up allowing the pirate Henry Every and his crew to stay in Nassau, free from persecution, to act as a deterrence. Since there was not much excitement for the pirates here, they eventually left Nassau, which allowed for a joint Spanish and French attack upon the colony that left the islands essentially desolate once again. Once the wars England was partaking in concluded, many of the privateers that they had employed were now unemployed. So they became pirates along the lines of their previous trade. The primary distinction between these two professions is that privateers were employed to attack enemy ships, while pirates held no allegiance and attacked anyone. And since the Bahamas were mostly uninhabited and had a history of being a pirate safe haven, the lands made for the perfect home for the pirates, who established a small base of operations that they called the Pirates' Republic. These pirates caused so much trouble for the powers in the Caribbean, and originally, the English decided to look the other way, since their ships were almost never targets. But soon, the pirates decided to change their ways, and began attacking British vessels, which posed a severe threat not only to England, but to the 13 colonies as well. The English knew that there needed to be something done about these pirates, but the treasury was dangerously low from all the recent wars. So the best the English could afford was to send Woodes Rogers, the English-appointed governor of the Bahamas, to Nassau. The proprietors, that were technically still rulers of the Bahamas, were forced to pass their rule over to the English for this to happen. Another way that the English tried to clamp down on pirates was offering them a pardon if they willingly and peacefully surrendered to the crown. By the time Rogers landed in Nassau, most of the pirates had either taken the offer of amnesty or fled, all except for Charles Vane, who put up a bit of a fight before fleeing the town. Rogers had anticipated a mostly empty Nassau when he arrived, since most of the residents of the town were pirates. So, he brought some colonists with him to repopulate the Bahamas, and with the expulsion of the pirates, the Bahamas entered a period of slow but steady growth, all while fighting off pirates and the Spanish. And soon enough, the nearby 13 colonies were in revolt against the British, where the British governor of Virginia moved the stockpile of gunpowder and munitions to the Bahamas, keeping it away from the rebels. After a short time, there would be a small American contingent off the coast of Nassau who were desperate for the military supplies that lay in the town. The Bahamians saw that they were outnumbered, and rather than fight the American troops, they filled the ship with as much war supply as they could and sent it off to friendlier waters. When the Americans raided the town, they took as much as they could find and were off again in a few weeks. The Spanish saw this war as an opportunity to rid themselves of England in the Caribbean and other colonial battlegrounds, so they supported the Americans by declaring war on England themselves. With significant American Navy support, there was a Spanish invasion force sent to attack Nassau. Since this force was twice the size of the Nassau garrison, the governor surrendered to avoid bloodshed that could be prevented, which seceded the lands to the Spanish. However, the British mounted a successful counterattack, with less than half of the Spanish soldiers stationed in the Bahamas. Because of this war, the Bahamas saw another wave of migration from British Loyalists fleeing America, many of whom brought their slaves with them, which now made the population of black people the majority. The infertility of the soil of the Bahamas was to the detriment of most people, but not for the slaves. Since the soil didn't allow for many large plantations, slaves in the Bahamas were treated better than many places in the world, and soon the emancipation of slaves in the British Empire freed these men from their slavery. Despite the relatively good conditions for black people in the Bahamas, the nation had a particularly good relationship with the Confederate States once they seceded. Nassau proved to be the perfect place for Confederate blockade runners, which skyrocketed Bahamian wealth and population. People from all around the world were in Nassau, trading cotton for war supplies and increasing the Bahamas' presence on the international stage. But much of the wealth and position the Bahamas gained was destroyed, as a hurricane tore through the islands, destroying many buildings, farmland, and ships. This single hurricane returned the Bahamas to their previous position as a minor British colony with an impoverished population. The damage done impacted the part that the nation played in the First World War, with them only originally being able to send 30 men, coined the Gallant 30. Later on in the war, a couple thousand more Bahamians were able to serve in the armed forces. Bahamians found another opportunity to make some money in going against the American government, as Prohibition began in the United States. Just like during the Civil War, the Bahamas' proximity to the US allowed it to be the perfect destination for smuggling into the United States, which saw a boom to the national economy. With this wealth, many public works were improved, and a lot of money was invested into tourism, to be able to keep some money flowing into the islands once the era of Prohibition ended. The Second World War had immense impact on the Bahamas, and although many men did fight, it was not particularly found through military action. The real boon to the Bahamas was the improvement to the lives of average Bahamians. Many of these improvements came with the arrival of the Duke of Windsor, who was made the governor of the Bahamas after controversy of suspected Nazi sympathies while he was king. The Duke curbed poverty, improved infrastructure, and helped quell riots that occurred. These riots began in response to the Bahamian government ignoring their people's demands for equal pay to foreign American workers while the Duke was away. So once he returned, and police action showed little to no results, the workers' pay was raised, and a free meal at lunch was offered. Despite the good the Duke did, it is important to remember that he hated the Bahamas, especially as it had a majority black population. He called the Bahamas a third-class British colony, and is quoted in saying about the black editor of the Nassau Daily Tribune, Etienne Dupac, "It must be remembered that Dupac is more than half Negro, and due to the particular mentality of this race, they seem unable to rise to prominence without losing their equilibrium." And after the Second World War concluded, the Bahamas focused on its tourism sector, which was greatly aided by the airports built during the war for training the Royal Air Force, with another boost to tourism coming with the United States blocking travel to Cuba. Another industry that boomed in the Bahamas after the war was that of the offshore bank accounts, since the Bahamas had and has no income tax or corporate tax. There was a new movement that sprouted out of the desire for self-determination, and to oppose the white elite class that ruled over the majority black nation. This group founded the Progressive Liberal Party, or the PLP, and in reaction, the British elites of the colony created the United Bahamas Party, or the UBP. Once the British granted the colony internal self-governance, general elections were held. But, due to gerrymandering, the UBP won the election with a minority of votes. However, in the next election, the UBP and PLP won the same amount of seats. And, since the Labour Party won one seat and supported the PLP, it allowed them to form the first black-led government of the Bahamas together. Through this government and its Prime Minister Lyndon Pindling, the Bahamas gained full independence from Britain. There would now be a massive wave of Haitian migrants that arrived in the nation. Fleeing their home country, these people often work low-paying jobs, and have been the target of a long-lasting xenophobia and racism in the Bahamas. Now, for a third time, the Bahamas' geography led it to oppose the US government's will, as a fairly significant part of the illicit drugs that enter the United States travels through the Bahamas. Cartel presence in the Bahamas has proven to be quite a plague on the nation, with a direct relation to crime and bribes on politicians. The global financial crisis greatly affected the Bahamas, since less people could afford to travel to the Bahamas, and tourism was and is the nation's largest industry. The government tried to aid the crisis by providing public works, which somewhat cushioned the blow. But the economic crash had lasting negative effects on the relation to the aforementioned Haitian migrants that continued to flow into the nation. Relations deteriorated even further as Hurricane Dorian crashed through the Bahamas with devastating effects. This, followed by the economic downturn onset by the COVID pandemic, seems to set the Bahamian relation with Haitian migrants down a dark path. In response to the pandemic, the Bahamian government took a toll through restrictions, which cut tourism by 3/4, but it still has been labeled as a very high-risk location by the CDC. However, since the tourism sector plays such an important role in the Bahamian economy, the nation is taking steps to open up for tourism as soon as possible. And that is the state of the nation of the Bahamas. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video, and if you have any suggestions or comments, leave them in the comment section below, or email me, with my email in the description. I also started a Patreon if anyone is interested in supporting a small creator like myself.